Something else that's happened, and this is a little bit scary too, is regarding heart disease. To try and reduce heart disease, they've done something else, number one. And has a heart should be here, is that right? And if you don't have any heart problems, you're going to find out tonight how to prevent them. And if you do have heart problems, you're going to find out tonight how you can conquer them, because we live in a body with an inbuilt ability to heal itself. And never should we make a decision on this, on fear. 2 Timothy 1 verse 7, God says, I've not given you the spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. Knowledge is power, love binds us together, and a sound mind considers what you're hearing. Because remember, it's your God-given right to choose what you do. And I find there are a lot of people that are doing things out of fear. One lady was on an aspirin every day, and I said, you know, you can stop that. She said, I cannot. The doctor said I will die. And that's why Psalm 146 verse 3 says, put not your trust in princes, neither in the Son of Man, in whom there is no help. Their breath goes forth, they return unto their earth. In that very day their thoughts perish, describing what happens when we die. In other words, they're just a human being. They're just another person. And then the next verse, verse 5 says, happy is he that hath the God of Jacob as his help, who made heaven, earth, sea, and all that in them is, that includes us, that keeps truth forever. So I want to show you two systems of supposed healing. One's based on fear, and it's based on a theory. Notice it's a theory. In fact, Charles Darwin, who basically made first the theory of evolution famous, he said his theory rested on what they would find on the inside of the cell. Do you know what that means? What we know about the inside of the cell, it's a literal city inside the cell. That refutes his theory. This theory states that we evolved, and because we evolved, we cannot heal, and because we cannot heal, we have to take drugs. And a whole billion-dollar industry was developed to create the drugs with the supposed ability to heal. But drugs never heal. They just change the form and location. If someone's got eczema and they put cortisone, it goes away. But for how long? 2 weeks later it comes back twice as bad. I've met people who've been on cortisone for eczema, psoriasis for 20 years. Is it healing? No, all it's doing is masking the symptoms. This system is based on deception. And that cortisone cream is a deception. You put that on, all the symptoms go. But then it comes back. No, it has not healed you. It's a trick. It's a deception. Now, if someone's whole body is covered in eczema, out of control, I acknowledge cortisone taken when it's extreme should calm it down. But in the next step, they should have the book Sustain Me and read what changes to make so that their body can conquer it. The other system is based on faith. Faith in the fact that our body was created in the image of God. By the way, what an honour to be created in the image of God with an inbuilt ability to heal itself. And sometimes herbs can be added to help heal. This is the truth. These two systems are the systems presented on how to heal the body when it gets sick today. So let's look at the heart. Why is it the number one killer in the world today? It's the number one killer in the world today because more people die from strokes and heart attacks than anything else. So what's medicine doing? What are the princes doing to reduce heart disease? Let's do an assessment of what steps have been taken. Number one, a fat-free diet. Is that right? Fat-free or low fat? And it was in about the 1970s, I think, that margarine was introduced. I've never eaten margarine. I was brought up on butter, and margarine doesn't taste anything like butter, does it? But I knew that even butter wasn't great because the cows, they're given so many antibiotics. They're eating grass that around the fence that had formaldehyde on it, or some toxic, and all of those environmental poisons are stored in the fat. So when my children started eating bread, when they had all their teeth, I used to put olive oil on their bread. They'd toast their bread, put olive oil and honey on it, and they ate it as if they were eating the most wonderful dessert. And I remember watching them for a while and thinking I might taste it. See, I wasn't brought up with olive oil on bread. Do you know, it's really nice. And now I laugh putting olive oil on my bread. Do you know more people put olive oil on their bread than any other spread in the world? I got that off the Barlotti olive oil bottle. Piece of information. Has this fat-free, low-fat diet, getting people to stop butter and eat margarine, has that reduced heart disease? Not at all. Not at all. But actually what it has done is increased cancer because margarine is a toxic fat. Your body cannot recognise it. In fact, you're better to eat butter than margarine because margarine is so toxic. What else have they done to try and reduce heart disease? Put everyone over the age of 50 on a blood thinner, that's right. And what's the common blood thinner that people are put on? It's aspirin. Well, let me give you the side effects for aspirin. It's also called Cartia. Side effects of aspirin: stomach bleed, it's the number one cause of stomach ulcer. Brain bleed, big contributing factor to Alzheimer's. Eye bleeds, big contributing factors to deterioration of eyesight. Every drug has a side effect. Well, has that reduced heart disease? No, not at all, not at all. So what else has happened? Put everyone that has had a heart attack or a stroke on statin drugs. What are statin drugs? Statin drugs are cholesterol-lowering medication. Well, what we need to look at is what is cholesterol. The liver makes cholesterol, and it makes cholesterol using a couple of nutrients. 80% of the cholesterol that the liver makes is made from glucose, and 20% of the cholesterol that the liver makes is made from fat. Now, this one piece of information alone tells us it's not the butter on the bread, it's the bread under the butter. The wrong guy's been shot. It's not the olive oil on the pasta, it's the pasta under the olive oil. But as I showed you in the last lecture, it's what they've done to the wheat. I've had many guests come to our retreats, and we had a couple from Greece, and they were in their late 20s. They said, we can't eat pasta or bread in Australia, but when we go back to Greece into our little village, we can eat that bread and we can eat that pasta. That's because in that little village they've still got the original wheat. They grow the same wheat year after year. It hasn't been hybridised. So let's look at cholesterol. There are two main types of cholesterol. One's called high density lipoprotein, LDL. That's not quite right. HDL. That should be a D. L. High density lipoprotein. High density lipoprotein is called the good guy, the good cholesterol, because it's the carrier of excess cholesterol back to the liver. Low density lipoprotein, or LDL, is called the bad cholesterol, but the body doesn't make bad things. LDL has a purpose. It's the repairer and the rebuilder. And as a repairer and a rebuilder, you'll always find it wherever there's a need for rebuilding and repairing. But LDL does something else. LDL delivers cholesterol to the brain because the brain loves cholesterol. The brain is the fattiest organ in the body. The membrane around every cell is 50% fat, except for the brain, it's 70% fat. And the brain loves burning fat as fuel because fat gives more than twice the units of energy that glucose does. We had a midwife attend our program. She was in her 80s and she'd worked in Africa for 20 years. She said at one point the African babies were not developing properly. So they investigated why the babies' brains, their milestones weren't happening, and they discovered that the African women were watering down the powdered milk. And these babies weren't getting enough fat. The fattiest food on the planet is breast milk in the first month. In fact, the food that has the highest cholesterol levels is breast milk in the first month. Second month it's getting a little bit less because that developing brain must have fat. Go into the supermarket, this is a little bit of homework for you, and go to where they have baby formulas and have a look on the baby formulas, and every one of them has an addition of a saturated fat. It'll either be palm oil or coconut oil, because that developing brain must have fat. Let's go to the other end of life. Let's go to the latter years of life. And what's happening in Australia, 1,700 cases of Alzheimer's is being diagnosed every week. Alzheimer's. In fact, there's no record of it in the Bible, our oldest history book. And Alzheimer's was almost not known over 100 years ago. Is it around the time this fat-free theory came out? It's not the only cause, and we're looking at Alzheimer's as another meeting. It's not the only cause of Alzheimer's, but I believe it's a contributing factor. Because the side effect of the statin drugs, and two popular ones are Lipitor, Crestor, and all your statin drugs. How do they work? They inhibit the pathway in the liver that makes cholesterol. That's how they work. But that same pathway that the liver uses to make cholesterol, it uses to make coenzyme Q10. And coenzyme Q10 is our heart protective enzyme. So someone can go on cholesterol-lowering medication with the hope to prevent a heart attack, and they can increase their risk because they've now lost coenzyme Q10. Every drug has a side effect. And the side effects of the statin drugs are Alzheimer's, dementia, muscle wasting, memory loss. They've just added another one, and that is breast cancer. Because as you'll see later in the week when we look at hormones, all our hormones are made from cholesterol. If you haven't got a correct cholesterol level, you're not going to make your sex hormones. Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, who wrote the book, he's a British cardiovascular surgeon who wrote the book, The Great Cholesterol Con, and that's quoted, I've got that in my book, Sustain Me in the Heart chapter. He said, for the first time, normal levels of a normal vital body substance is being called a disease. That's cholesterol. It's important. So let's have a look at the blood vessel and how these two work. I'd like to get a red for this. Hopefully it's going to behave. So here's our blood vessel. And cholesterol, the LDL, it sits on the edge. And the reason it sits on the edge of the blood vessel is because of its low density. HDL, because of its high density, sits in the middle. And what's happening in the blood is that the arterial walls are breaking down because of environmental poisons. So we have many books in our library at home, and they're quoted in my book, Sustain Me. The Great Cholesterol Con by Dr. Malcolm Kendrick, The Great Cholesterol Lie by Dr. Dwight Lundell, a cardiovascular surgeon that's performed 10,000 bypasses. And he's written a book, The Great Cholesterol Lie. An Australian PhD, Dr. Peter Dingle, he wrote a book, The Great Cholesterol Deception. There's another book, The Great Cholesterol Hoax. Johnny Bowden wrote a book, The Great Cholesterol Myth. We're running out of names. And so Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, the name of her book is Put Your Heart in Your Mouth. I guess there were no more names. Now, the first 3 chapters of her book, she shows that it's deterioration to the arterial wall that is causing a breakdown. So environmental poisons, they're everywhere. She spends the first 3 chapters listing them all. It's in our food, it's in our cleaning products, it's even in our clothes. Nap. You won't sleep well if you sleep with these fabrics, nylon, acrylic, polyester. In the Industrial Revolution, these fabrics were created in a chemical laboratory. Did everyone get that? A chemical laboratory. They're chemicals, and if they're on our skin, especially the ladies, you see men, it's usually cotton underwear, cotton undershirts, cotton shirt, cotton jeans, whereas the lady like the pretty things. And a lot of those pretty fabrics are made out of nylon, acrylic and polyester. And many ladies have gone to them because you just wash and hang and you don't have to iron, you can pull them out of your suitcase. It's a great deception because little by little these chemicals are coming into the body through our skin. So ladies, you go to an underwear shop and try and find a bra that's made out of natural fibre. It's almost impossible. But I know I'll tell you a funny story. When I was here 2 years ago, I was in, I think it was Coeur d'Alene. There's a Trader's Joe's there. And there was this big stand of underwear and leggings and singlets and tops. And it was all made out of bamboo. It was called Boody, B-O-O-D-Y. I got so excited. So I spent $200 buying all this stuff, leggings for my daughter, and I went home and I'm taking the brand off and I read the fine print, made in Australia. It's an Australian brand. So here am I filling my suitcase with something going back to Australia. And that's how I know that hopefully Trader Joe's in Coeur d'Alene still have that stand. So you can buy them, you just need to search out. And we the consumer have power. If every single woman would only buy bras out of natural fibre, that would change the store. But little by little, I mentioned this, and when we look at hormones, you'll see that it's also disrupting the hormones. But these chemicals are coming in, and what they're doing is they're effectively damaging the little endothelium cells that line the arteries. Little by little, in our food, in our cleaning products, what you're washing your clothes with, because remnants are still in the clothes. It's not the odd day you wear a polyester nightshirt or the odd day you don't. It's what you do every day, every day, every day. My daughter bought me a linen nightie. I look like I'm out of Little House on the Prairie. this big nightie, but oh, it's so nice to sleep in. And we spend a third of our life in bed, so be very careful on what are your sheets made out of, what's your pillow made out of, what are your blankets made out of. And I'm alarmed that I don't think there's been a home that I have been in my 9 months of travel that doesn't have polyester blankets. Have a look at the blankets, polyester blankets. And I'm in New Zealand, and the New Zealand sheep farmers are burning their wool because the New Zealanders are buying polyester blankets. And when I was in Scotland last year, I said, stop buying the polyester, support your local industry, support your sheep farmers, buy wool. And I was signing books, and a young woman came up and said, I'm a shepherdess. Thank you so much for what you've just said. We're using our wool as mulch around the trees. It's been a total deception, really, hasn't it? And those chemical fabrics, little by little, they're coming in, they're disrupting body functions, they're getting into the blood, and they're eating away at the arterial wall. Okay, students, what's going to plug up the holes? LDL. And so it comes along and it starts plugging up the holes. What can also damage it is not only the many chemicals that we're exposed to, but it is also exposure to mold. Mold is a toxic poison. It can come into the body and it can damage the tissues. So absolutely, the processed food, we don't realise what's on that processed food, artificial flavourings and colourings, and so the damage continues. Cigarettes contain approximately 7,000 chemicals today, it is estimated. Now, do you know what that's called? That's called 85% occlusion of the arterial wall. And a friend of mine, his name's David, he's a doctor of chiropractic. He's very fit. He goes to Europe every year, cycles 200k cycles. He eats plants. He's a vegetarian. He doesn't drink or smoke. He was getting breathless. And his friend, who's a cardiologist, did an angiogram, and he said, you've got 2 arteries with 85% occlusion. You're a walking, talking heart attack, just waiting to happen. So they rushed him into hospital. They sawed I used to work in operating theatre, they saw those ribs open. They cut out the offending arteries. They cut a couple of arteries out of the back of the legs, sew that up and put them in here. And does that doctor tell the person to change their lifestyle? Change their food? No, because doctors don't study nutrition. Or they study about 4 hours in 7 years, which is crazy. I'm not against doctors. Some of my best friends are doctors. And I believe most doctors are ethical. I'm against the system that is not teaching the truth. And when the Bible says, put not your trust in princes, and there are a movement of doctors who are not putting their trust in the princes in the pharmaceutical company anymore because they don't actually tell the truth. It's like the article where I read, new cancer cure, 50% cure. Then you read the fine print, 2 people were tested and 1 died. So it's all the way see it. Is the cup half full or is the cup half empty? And so David had he had the 2 bypasses. He's 62. So I was talking to him. He said, it's genetics, Barb. Well, do you know what they're relating to genetics now? 5%. Genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. My mother died a cripple in a wheelchair with rheumatoid arthritis at 51. Notice that I'm not a cripple in a wheelchair and I'm way past 51 and I'm not dead. Because genetics may load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. That's the good news. And that's what I said, Dave. Genetics loads the gun, lifestyle pulls the trigger. He said, well, that's what my doctor said. It's genetics. He ended up coming to the retreat. And I put my detective hat on. I wanted to know why this had happened to David. And how many people would say, well, look at him. He cycles. He's plant-based. What good's it done him? But there is always a reason. Proverbs 26 verse 2, the Bible says, the curse causeless shall not come. No problem happens without a cause. So I said, tell me about your childhood, David. Did you have a happy, healthy childhood? He said, oh, it wasn't too bad. Both my parents chain smoked. Aha. Both parents chain smoking. And this is in the 50s, 60s, where people were smoking in restaurants, people were smoking in cars, people were smoking everywhere. In fact, every sport event, all the advertising was smoking. There were smokes on the smoking advertisements, all on the television. It's been a big change since then. Through our blood, there's little protein molecules. And on the high carbohydrate diet, releasing too much glucose, that glucose connects with the protein molecules and creates something that they call ages, and they stick to the arterial wall. And the number one cause of heart disease is the dislodging of these little molecules of glucose and protein moving and getting stuck. And if that's in the carotid artery, that's a stroke. And if that's in the heart muscle, that's a cardiac arrest. That's the number one cause of heart disease. Can you see it's not one thing that causes heart disease? Can you see it's a whole lot of little bits and pieces? To say that cholesterol causes heart disease is like saying that the fire trucks are causing the fire. Well, they must. They're always there. They're the one common denominator, so they must be. And that's what's happened with cholesterol. And that's why all the books that I quoted to you, that are all listed in my Sustain Me book. And the reason why the doctor says you must be on this medication is because the pharmaceutical companies tell him that. Something else that's happened, and this is a little bit scary too, is regarding heart disease. To try and reduce heart disease, they've done something else. Number one, they've lowered the levels. What do I mean by that? They've lowered the levels. Well, it was probably about 10 years ago now. I'm getting better at it. It was about 10 years ago, I attended a program in Alabama, and there was a nutritionist during the program. She was 69. She said, I've got the advantage of being schooled in university 40 years ago. She said 40 years ago we were told that it was perfectly fine to have a cholesterol level of 300. Did everyone hear that? A cholesterol level of 300. She said it was perfectly fine. And last year in Maryland, I was talking to a pathologist. She's retired, so she was in her mid-70s. She said, my job was to test blood for cholesterol levels, and we considered a cholesterol level of 350 perfectly fine. And it was only 4 months ago, a friend of mine who lives in Wisconsin, she went and had a blood test for her insurance, her life insurance, and her cholesterol levels were 280. And they gave her her full insurance. That didn't bother them at all. And yet, what are you told now? I think currently the doctor will say you cannot go over 190, is that right? It's a lie, it's a myth, it's a hoax. And the Framingham Heart Study, it was set up to prove that cholesterol causes heart disease, but it never has. And it's done in the little town of Framingham. I think 30,000 people. It's been going for 30, 40 years. Some die, more come on. But what it did prove is that people with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's. Do you need a moment's silence to digest that? People with high cholesterol levels don't get Alzheimer's because the brain is the fattiest organ in the body and it loves fat. But also there's fats and there's fats. There's the dangerous fats, which are your altered fats, which we looked at in our last lecture. And when you go into the supermarket, have a look at them. They're in clear plastic bottles and they're the cheapest ones. Don't touch them. Not only are they interfering with the uptake of glucose at the cellular level, contributing to diabetes, but they are also damaging the arterial wall. Margarine, because it's an altered toxic fat, it also damages the arterial wall. If a person goes under 150, they're not going to be making their sex hormones because all our sex hormones are made from cholesterol. They're not going to be able to make vitamin D because vitamin D, when the sun hits the skin, it converts a form of cholesterol just under the skin to vitamin D. You don't have enough cholesterol, you're not going to get enough vitamin D. Remember what Dr. Malcolm Kendrick said, for the first time, normal levels of a normal vital body substance is being called a disease. That's cholesterol. He said, I'm still waiting for the proof that fat causes heart disease. Did you hear that? There's no proof. And Ansel Keys from Minneapolis, he is the researcher that first put the theory forth that fat causes heart disease. And in the book, The Great Cholesterol Con, Dr. Malcolm Kendrick quotes him. He says, we're pretty sure the evidence will come. Is that science? It's actually a theory. It's an ungrounded theory. And here we are 70 years later and it still hasn't been proven. But what has exploded is Alzheimer's and dementia on this fat-free diet. Not the only cause, as you will see when we look at it later in the week, but I believe it is a contributing factor. So you might say to me, well, Barbara, what are your cholesterol levels? I don't know. I'll never have a blood test, so I'll never know. Do you have to know? Everything works. And how many people have the test, find out that they're maybe 220, and then fear. Is that right? Fear, because the prince says, you've got to go on the statin drug straight away or you might die from a heart attack. So let me tell you the story of Dr. Dwight Graveline. He wrote a book called Lipitor, Thief of Memory. He's a doctor and an astronaut. I think he was in about his early 50s. He went and had his yearly blood test. And the doctor said, his cholesterol levels were 220. He said, oh, it's a bit high. So he put him on Lipitor. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know where he was. So they stopped the Lipitor, and within 48 hours, his mind was clear again. 10 months later, he went back for his yearly blood test. His cholesterol levels were still 220. Doc said, I want you to go back on that medication because we don't want you to have a heart attack. Well, he doesn't want to have a heart attack. No one wants a heart attack. And Graveline said, I'm not going back on that. I nearly went mad on that. And the doctor said, oh, that's very rare. Why did the doctor say that? Because the princes in the pharmaceutical company tell him that. He said, all right, half dose. So he went on half dose. Why did he go on half dose? Through fear. 6 weeks later, his wife found him out in the garden. He didn't know who she was, didn't know who he was, didn't know where he was. Stopped the drug immediately, and within 48 hours, his mind was clear. It's not rocket science, is it? So he put his story up on social media. It was picked up. And he was asked, can we put this out there? He said, be my guest. Within hours, thousands of hits. The same thing happened to me. How many people have Alzheimer's because of the statin drugs they're on. If you are taking statin medication, you can stop immediately. There will be a side effect though, I'm warning you. Your memory will return. That's the only side effect. There's no other side effect other than a plus. One lady said, well, what can I take to replace it? I said, why do you want to replace it? We need that cholesterol. Remember what Dr. Malcolm Kendrick said? I quote the cardiovascular surgeon, the British specialist. He said, for the first time, normal levels of a normal vital, did you hear that? Vital body substance. We need it to make our sex hormones. We need it to make our vitamin D. We need it for proper brain function. We need it. I'd also like to suggest, is there a need to have a blood test? Is there a need? I don't have blood tests because I don't have a need. Someone said, well, how do you know if there's something wrong with you? My body will tell me. My body will tell me if there's a problem. Everything works. Why does everything work? Everything works because I take steps. I go to bed early. I drink all my water. I eat nourishing food. So I do everything that I know the body needs. So we've looked at everything that's been implemented to reduce heart disease, and it has not. And if someone has a heart attack, they're given a protocol. No matter who you are, no matter what your age is, no matter what your size is, no matter what your health or sickness status, you're given a protocol. Have you noticed? So when my friend David, the chiropractic doctor, came to our retreat, when he heard all this, he stopped all his medication immediately. He stopped the blood thinning medication because he discovered an excellent blood thinner. It's called water. How do I know? Because at Misty Mountain I used to do a live blood analysis, and the blood should be like this. And occasionally, maybe in about 5% of people, the blood was like this. It was all clumped together. And I'd say to the person, have you had any water to drink today? No. I didn't drink water because I was travelling and I didn't want to have to keep stopping. I said, I can't read your blood because it's all clumped together. And they start drinking. And the next day, their blood looks like that. So that's how I know that water is a powerful blood thinner. And what are people told if they have I have to just go with this little by little. And what are people told if they have high blood pressure, if they've had a stroke? They're told not only to stop the fat, but they're told to stop salt. Is that right? Well, let me give you the salt issue. But first of all, blessed blood thinner is water. Oops, come over here. Water, and that should be 8 glasses a day. 8 ounce glasses. Start early, little by little. Are you going to bed with water next to your bed? Pardon? Great. Who's the winner when you do that? We are. Also cayenne pepper. Cayenne pepper is quite a powerful blood thinner. It's far more potent than rat poison, warfarin. That's what it is. And if someone is on warfarin, hopefully you're not, because it's a very dangerous drug. One man said to me his nose started bleeding, and every time he brushed his ham, it started bruising. He had bruises all over him. I said, you can stop it straight away as long as I would take a capsule of cayenne pepper a day. If your body's handling that, go up to 2 capsules 3 times a day. In fact, you could take a bucket of cayenne pepper a day and your nose will never bleed. You could take a bucket of cayenne pepper a day and you will never bruise. But I don't know anyone who has a bucket a day. Let's just go back to the capsule or 2 capsules 3 times a day. They're powerful blood thinners. Breath. Breath can make a difference. How does breath make a difference? When we breathe through our nose, we balance as blood gases. What are the blood gases? One blood gas is carbon dioxide. You can have too much carbon dioxide and you can have not enough carbon dioxide. And what nose breathing does is it keeps the correct balance of carbon dioxide. The other gas that's balanced by nose breathing is oxygen. We have 25 trillion red blood cells. We have 100 trillion cells in our body. 75 trillion are the cells that we've been looking at with its energy cycle. 25 trillion are red blood cells. And remember, the red blood cell carries the oxygen and it carries it on the hemoglobin. And hemoglobin has 4 docking sites for oxygen. And when the oxygen comes to the hemoglobin, there's a transfer. And there must be 4 molecules of carbon dioxide to be able to pick up 4 molecules of oxygen. When you breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, you lose too much carbon dioxide. But when you breathe in and out through your nose, it balances those blood gases. So to get more oxygen into the cell, we need to make sure we've got adequate carbon dioxide because it's a transfer. It's a transfer. So if there's only 2 molecules of carbon dioxide on the hemoglobin, only 2 molecules of oxygen can be picked up. And when you breathe out through your mouth, you lose too much carbon dioxide. So in and out through the nose. Even when you're exercising, you can train yourself into it. I have trained myself. Even running up a hill, I only nose breathe. You think that if you open your mouth, you'll get more oxygen, but you're not going to get it at the cell, and that's where we need it. But when you breathe in and out through your nose, the nose balances the carbon dioxide and oxygen levels. Something else that we breathe in when we breathe through our nose is another gas, and that's nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is only created when we breathe through our nose. It's created in our sinuses. When we breathe through our mouth, no nitric oxide. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this now is that carbon dioxide and nitric oxide are vasodilators. What are vasodilators? Vasodilators are agents that open the blood vessels. Also, cayenne pepper is a vasodilator. And when you open those blood vessels, you get a better delivery of blood all through the body. And that takes pressure off the heart. Do you know what that means? It eases blood pressure. Just breathing through the nose, in and out. You'll get better at it. And when you breathe in and out through the nose, long, slow, deep, it stimulates your parasympathetic nervous system. And your parasympathetic nervous system is your peaceful or your calming nervous system. Just from nose breathing, deep abdominal. We should be able to put our fist in our skirt, in our pants, in our belt, because when the clothes are too tight round the waist, it inhibits abdominal breathing. Also, when your core is strong, all the muscles are connected to your spine, and that causes us to stand upright. And when we stand upright, you can use your abdominal muscles breathing. If you're hunched like this, you can't use your abdominal muscles in the breathing. So once again, we get back to core. So the other thing that I wanted to show you is exercise. So we don't need this word here, do we? Because we're not going to do that. And as I mentioned in the last class, the high-intensity interval training was first looked at to help athletes in training for sports events, and they found that when they trained with the high-intensity interval training, they had an edge. So the high intensity, as I mentioned earlier, is anything that gets the heart rate up and the respiration increased. So that can be running, it can be walking very fast up a steep hill, it can be exercise bike, it can be push-ups or swimming very fast. So anything that gets that heart rate up and respiration. Recovery is resting time, but they have discovered on the research done on this form of exercise that the recovery is more powerful if your body's still moving. So on the exercise bike, you cycle very hard and fast in high intensity, and recovery times just slowly. And if you're on the rebounder, leaping high or jogging on the rebounder gets high intensity, and in recovery time you might be just doing the health bounce. That's just the health bounce. Or you might get off the rebounder and just do some stretches, do a little bit of upper body. So recovery time is usually 90 seconds. If your recovery time happens to be 5 minutes, that's perfectly fine, because Rome wasn't built in a day, and it's important to note what your recovery time is, because you will find that the fitter you get, the less your recovery time will be. And then it's usually done for a cycle of 6. The maths on that is approximately 15 minutes a day. Dr. Doug McGuff, in his book Body by Science, he explored this because he wanted a form of exercise that would strengthen the heart of his patients that had had strokes or heart disease. And he found that this was the most powerful form of exercise. Also, Al Sears, in his book PACE, PACE means progressive acceleration cardiopulmonary exertion, that's what PACE means. And he's also called the exercise doctor. Also, Dr. Michael Mosley, who unfortunately has passed now, but he's written some excellent books. One's called The Fast Diet, showing the intermittent fasting and how important that is. We've already looked at that, and we looked at that for diabetes. But he also has a book called The Fast Exercise, and he also looked at this high-intensity interval training. So the experts agree today that this is the best form of exercise to strengthen the heart, and no one has had a heart attack doing the high-intensity interval training. But there are reports of people having heart attacks doing 5K jogs. And the reason is that our cells and our body need that recovery time to mop up lactic acid, to actually get the heart rate down a little bit, respiration, and then go it again. And you have a look at children. No child jogs. They either run for their life or stop. Have you noticed? Again, it's the high-intensity interval training. It became popular just before the war, and then with the war, a lot of things were lost. And then it first started to appear, I think it was about the 1980s. A Japanese physiologist named Tabata put his figure-skating champion girls through the high-intensity interval training, and he just found that it gave them an edge. So stopping and looking at the view isn't an excuse because you can't keep going up the hill. It's an important part of of strengthening the cells, strengthening the heart to be able to form better. And that's what Doug McGuff found. He found that his heart patients were recovering and performing so much better on the high intensity interval training. You just got to find out what works for you. Just find out which exercise suits you. The best time to do it is in the morning because you reap the benefits all day long. So as you can see, we haven't actually defined it, but the Sustain Me principles, once again, as the author Ellen White in her book Ministry of Healing, she says they're the true remedies, and I found that to be true, and you can apply it to every health problem in the body. When you start drinking more water, when you start going to bed earlier, when you start eating a plant-based diet, when you start having a bit of sunshine every day, when you implement this exercise program every day. And remember what 1 Thessalonians 5:21 said? Prove all things. Prove it and see what it does. And what you will find is what I found. I never used to exercise, but I went away because I thought I'm busy all day. And it was in New Zealand, and the girl I stayed with, she said, I do a 5K walk every day, want to join me? After 3 kilometres, I could hardly keep up with her. And I was very embarrassed because I'm the health teacher. This is 18 years ago. And the next day, I could hardly walk. And I said to my body, I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. And so that's when I got home, I started to implement an exercise program and do a half-hour walk every day up and down hills. And then when I discovered the high intensity, I was even more excited. I was able to bring my exercise down to 15 minutes. And what I found was that I could just about keep up with anyone. So when I was climbing up the Rocky Mountains National Park with a 19-year-old boy and his 21-year-old mate, I kept up with him. And I said, thank you, Father in heaven, for this amazing body, and thank you for these simple principles that when you apply them to the human body, you will get the results.